Welcome back to Ask the Pastors, where you ask the questions and your pastors try to answer you. Ray, we have another question here. It says, we know that God is sovereign and that he has to change our hearts in order for us to know him and receive him. But we are also responsible for rejecting him. How do those two ideas work together? It might seem like we could blame God for not changing our hearts to make us believe him.
It's a great question. I hear it a lot. I'm sure you do as well. And maybe you've wrestled with this idea. Why is it that God has to change our hearts? And I think that's really where the core of the answer has to be. Why does God need to change our hearts? It's not because we're in some innocent, we just didn't know any better. It's actually quite the opposite. It's because we have the presence of hatred and rebellion in our hearts. God has to change us because we're guilty and we hate him and we don't want to listen to him. We don't want to acknowledge him. And the reason why that's wrong is God is just not some equal stranger out there that maybe I have a relationship or not. God is my creator. He's your creator. He's everyone's creator. Therefore, every human being owes God everything that we have. If God says to us we need to believe him, we by definition must believe him. To not believe in him is a great act of rebellion and rejection and hatred. And so the reason why God has to change our hearts, again, is it shows that we're guilty. It shows that we're at fault before him. And I like to think of an analogy of marriage. You know, when you're in a marriage, you've taken a position of vows. You owe your spouse a certain love and affection. And could you imagine a husband saying to his wife, well, I don't have to treat you well until you've changed my heart to love you. And the wife would say, that's ridiculous. You are supposed to love me. We're in this marriage. You've taken vows. Well, that's sort of the way it is with us before God. We owe God obedience, belief, respect, love. We owe him these things because of our relationship to him. And to say that God now has to do something first is simply to admit our guilt, that we are not right before him, and that's our fault.
Yeah, very good. And it's also important to remember, we're not in trouble with God simply because we don't believe in Jesus. In fact, we're in trouble with God since Adam fell and since we ourselves sinned. We're already in trouble with God. And the only way to escape that is through belief in Jesus. God provides a way out of that. Now, remember the example of Pharaoh. Pharaoh was told to let God's people go. And you know the plagues, time after time, Pharaoh went back on his promise to let God's people go. The text says that several times God hardened Pharaoh's heart. It says several other times that Pharaoh hardened his own heart. But one thing was constant throughout. In every instance, Pharaoh did exactly what Pharaoh wanted to do. And that's how God can judge us. When we sin, we don't get to say, God, it's your fault that I sinned. No, when we sin, we are doing according to the evil of our own hearts. Well, that's Ask the Pastor. Please be sure to send in your questions and we'll answer them again next week.